She said men went to bed with Rita Hayworth but woke up with her. Margarita Cansino, a shy girl from Brooklyn who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. That gap between what she was made into and what she actually was is the whole story. It never closed, not once, in 68 years. She was born in Brooklyn in October 1918, the first child of Eduardo Cansino and Volga Hayworth. Her father came from a line of Spanish dancers. His own father, Antonio Cansino, had introduced the bolero to American audiences. Her mother had been a Ziegfeld girl before she gave up performing for marriage and children. Volga's ambitions went quiet. Eduardo's did not. The Cansinos were not a family so much as a traveling act. Before Margarita was old enough for school, she was living out of theatrical hotels, moving from city to city while her father and his sister Elisa performed as the dancing Cansinos. Her mother managed the bookings, raised the children, and waited. When Margarita finally started school at 6, her mother had fought hard to make it happen. Eduardo saw formal education as time taken away from dancing. He was not interested in his daughter having a childhood in any conventional sense. He enrolled her in dance training as soon as she showed aptitude, and the training was not gentle. She later said that mistakes during rehearsals meant beatings. By 12, she was out of school entirely. Eduardo pulled her from the 9th grade at Hamilton High in Los Angeles and made her his full-time dancing partner. He introduced her to club owners and nightclub audiences as his wife. He dressed her in costumes made for a grown woman and painted her face with heavy adult makeup. Because California law barred minors from working in certain venues, Eduardo took her across the border to perform in Tijuana and on gambling boats anchored off the California coast. These were not glamorous engagements. They were dim rooms full of men, and Margarita was 12, 13, 14 years old, performing for them in her father's charge. Her mother stayed home with the boys. What Eduardo did to Margarita in private during those years became known decades later through her second husband, Orson Welles. Welles told her biographer, Barbara Leeming, in 1983 that Rita had confided in him about her abuse at her father's hands. Leeming had been researching a biography of Welles and kept hearing from people how much Rita hated her father. Then Welles told her the truth. The evidence rests primarily on Welles's account, as the Time magazine reviewer of Leeming's 1989 biography noted, but Welles had no motive to fabricate it. The shape of Rita's adult life, her passivity with men, her difficulty protecting herself from people who wanted to use her, her rages, her collapses, fits the pattern with a coherence that is hard to argue away. By 16, she had been spotted performing in a Tijuana club by a Fox Pictures executive named Winfield Sheehan, who signed her as Rita Cansino. Fox cast her in small, interchangeable exotic roles. She played Argentinian, Egyptian, Russian, whatever the part called for. When her option ran out, they let her go without looking back. Eduardo, facing a stalled career for his daughter, turned to a man named Edward Judson for help. Judson was 40 years old, a car salesman turned promoter, smooth in presentation and calculating in nature. He had been married twice before and divorced twice. Eduardo hired him to manage Margarita's career, and within a year, despite her parents' alarm, Judson had married her. She was 18 and he was more than twice her age. She later said she had married him for love, and that he married her for an investment. "From the first, he told me I couldn't do anything for myself," she said. "My personality crawled deeper and deeper into a shell." The man she had married to escape her father's control turned out to operate on the same basic principle, that she was a product to be managed, not a person to be known. He took over decisions about her appearance, her career, her public presentation. He also, according to later accounts, directed her to sleep with men who could advance her career. One of those men was Harry Cohn. Cohn ran Columbia Pictures and was one of the most feared executives in Hollywood. He had a well-established reputation for expecting and demanding sexual favors from the women on his lot. Rita refused him directly. It set off a feud that lasted the rest of Cohn's life, running as a cold current beneath every professional interaction they had. And Cohn signed her anyway, because he was too sharp a businessman not to see what she could become. Between Judson and Cohn, Margarita Cansino was physically remade. Her raven hair was dyed auburn. Her hairline was raised by electrolysis, a procedure that required needles applied to her scalp over many months, killing the follicles one by one to give her what they decided was a more conventionally American look. She took her mother's maiden name and became Rita Hayworth, and her father, who had used her entire life, was furious at losing even that claim on her. Her own name, the one Eduardo had given her, was gone. So was the dark-haired Spanish girl, edited out of existence by two men who had decided she was more useful as something else. What she had now was a persona designed entirely by other people. She was 20 years old. She was not entirely passive about this. She had always wanted to act seriously, and the Columbia contract gave her access to acting lessons for the first time, something Eduardo had never seen any value in. She threw herself into the work with genuine hunger, and it showed. She had real ability, and she had something beyond ability, a quality on camera that nobody could manufacture. And Fred Astaire, who danced with more great partners than almost anyone in Hollywood history, called her his favorite. The Life magazine pinup photograph came in August 1941. Bob Landry took it on a studio set, Rita kneeling on a bed in a silk and lace negligee, looking over her shoulder at the camera. The image ran 4 months before Pearl Harbor. Once the country entered the war, it went everywhere, reproduced on more than 5 million copies across the duration of the conflict. Soldiers carried it into the Pacific, into North Africa, into every theater of a war that was tearing the world apart. She was 22 years old in that photograph. She did not want to be a pinup. She wanted to be an actress, a dancer, someone taken seriously for what she could do. During the war years, she toured over 300 cities selling war bonds, performed at the Hollywood Canteen, visited military hospitals. She worked in the cause with real dedication and at real personal cost to her schedule and her health. But the image had already gotten away from her. Whatever she actually did, whatever she actually was, the photograph was simpler and the photograph was what stuck. The worst version of that reduction came in 1946. The crew preparing an atomic bomb for testing at Bikini Atoll cut Rita's photograph from a magazine and taped it to the side of the weapon. They stenciled the bomb's nickname across the casing in 2-inch black letters. Gilda, the name of her most famous film, meant as a tribute of some kind. Wells later told Leeming what happened when Rita found out. "Rita used to fly into terrible rages all the time," he said. But the angriest was when she found out that they'd put her on the atom bomb. She wanted to go to Washington and hold a press conference. Harry Cohn would not permit it. He told her it would be unpatriotic. She had no choice but to stay quiet, and she did. And the image detonated over the Pacific with her face on it. Gilda itself, released earlier in 1946, is worth understanding beyond the one-glove moment everyone remembers. Rita played the title character opposite Glenn Ford, a woman who walks into a room and derails everything in it, desired and punished for being desired in the same motion. The censors allowed the glove scene through, and they were probably right to be nervous about it. But Gilda is also a woman being systematically mistreated by the man who claims to love her, absorbing it because her circumstances give her nowhere to go. The character's awareness of her own situation combined with her inability to act on that awareness, that tension is what made the performance so charged. Rita understood that position from the inside. She had been living a version of it since she was 12 years old. It showed. The problem Gilda created was that Columbia decided it was a formula. Cohn pushed her into a series of similar constructions, beautiful, dangerous, defined entirely by her effect on men. Rita kept arguing she was more than that, asked for different parts, pushed for range, resisted the category. And Cohn ignored every word of it, because the studio had an asset and intended to use it as they saw fit. Her marriage to Wells was the closest she got to something real. He had pursued her with unusual deliberateness. He saw the life photograph, found her address, and wrote to her persistently for months until she agreed to meet him. They married in September 1943, when she was 24 and he was 28. They had a daughter, Rebecca, born in December 1944. By Rita's own account, those early years together held genuine warmth. Wells was also brilliant in a way that made daily life genuinely difficult. He was perpetually broke from self-financed projects that consumed money he did not have. He was unable to remain faithful for long. He was consuming as a personality. Everything orbited him, and Rita found herself once again in a situation where her own interior life got little space. By 1946, she had moved out with Rebecca, and they divorced in November 1947. Before the divorce was finalized, Wells talked her into starring in The Lady from Shanghai, a film he wrote and directed. He cast her as a scheming femme fatale and bleached her auburn hair to platinum blonde, a decision that appalled Columbia and disoriented the public. The studio buried the film after a limited release. Wells said he was making art, and in a formal sense he was, but his relationship to his estranged wife in the material is harder to characterize charitably. Rita told him, sometime in those years, that the only happiness she had ever known in her life had been with him. Wells's answer has followed the story ever since. "If this was happiness," he said, "imagine what the rest of her life had been." In 1948, at a party on the French Riviera, she met Prince Ali Khan, one of the most socially prominent men in Europe. the son of the Aga Khan. He was charming and relentless in his pursuit. Their affair became an international tabloid story. When she became pregnant, they married in May 1949 in the south of France, in a ceremony the press covered as though it were a state occasion. Their daughter Yasmin was born that December. By 1951, the marriage was already breaking down. Ali Khan's compulsive womanizing was something he was apparently unable to curtail. Rita had believed that love would change the situation. It did not, and she divorced him in 1953 and took Yasmin back to California. What came next was genuinely bad. Rita married Dick Haymes in September 1953, less than 3 months after the Ali Khan divorce was finalized. Haymes was a singer in career decline who was facing deportation proceedings as a non-citizen, and who had already been married and divorced multiple times. The accounts of the marriage suggest it was physically as well as emotionally brutal, and she left him in 1955. In 1958, she married one more time to a producer named James Hill, and that marriage ended in 1961. 5 marriages, 5 divorces. The press spent years treating this as evidence of something deficient in Rita, a failure of judgment, a weakness of character. The more honest accounting is different. She had grown up in a situation that gave her no reference point for what it looked like when someone treated her well. She did not know what she was supposed to be looking for. She kept trying anyway, and she kept finding versions of control or infidelity or violence, and she kept leaving. The leaving was the bravery, even when the world read it as failure. She kept working through all of it, because she needed the money, and because she did not know how to stop. Her later films rarely gave her material equal to what she was capable of. She aged out of the specific category Columbia had built for her, and the studio had no interest in figuring out what she might be worth in something else. Cohn died in 1958, and their feud ended with him, but his absence did not transform her options. She worked on through the 1960s and into the early 1970s, and her last film was in 1972. During those years, something was happening that the people around her could not interpret correctly. She was forgetting lines, arriving on set confused, unable to follow a conversation from one sentence to the next. Her behavior in social situations was becoming unpredictable. The people who knew her assumed it was alcohol. She had been a drinker for years, and the symptoms matched what they expected. Her daughter Yasmin, away at school and then college, noticed that her mother kept repeating herself on the phone, asking the same questions within a single conversation. She was worried, but she was young and she didn't know what she was seeing. Nobody did, yet. What Rita had was Alzheimer's disease. The formal diagnosis did not come until 1981, when she was 62 years old. At that time, Alzheimer's was not broadly understood by the public. The Alzheimer's Association had just been founded. Most people thought of dementia as something that happened to the very elderly, not to women in their early 60s who had been famous faces 30 years before. Yasmin, who had moved to New York after college, took her mother in. She filed for legal conservatorship and arranged for the two of them to live in adjacent apartments on the same floor. She became her mother's caretaker for the last 6 years of Rita's life, through all of it. The confusion, the rage, the mornings when Rita would look at her daughter and not know who she was. Just the basics of eventually trying to get her in the shower, Yasmin said later. It was very painful. Rita Hayworth died on May 14, 1987, in their shared New York apartment. She was 68 years old. Yasmin founded the Rita Hayworth Gala through the Alzheimer's Association in 1984, while her mother was still alive. The event became an annual institution in New York and Chicago, and over the decades has raised tens of millions of dollars for research and support. The fact that the name Rita Hayworth, a name invented by a studio in 1937 to sand off a young woman's ethnic identity and make her more commercially useful, became the name attached to one of the most significant Alzheimer's advocacy efforts in the country, is one of the stranger reversals of the whole story. What is left of Rita Hayworth at this distance is difficult to summarize without flattening it. She was one of the most talented performers of the studio era, a dancer of real technical accomplishment, an actress of genuine emotional depth, with a quality on camera that no amount of deliberate physical transformation could have installed if it hadn't already been there. The work in Gilda holds up. The work in Only Angels Have Wings, in CoverGirl, in The Lady from Shanghai Despite Everything. It holds up, and it holds up because of something real in her that nothing they did to her could entirely take away. But she was also a woman who was handled, controlled, remade, and consumed by almost every institution and relationship she moved through. Her father, Edward Judson, Harry Cohn, the studio system itself. The military attached her face to a nuclear weapon, without asking her, and the studio told her to accept it quietly. She had 5 marriages to men who could not or would not treat her as a full person with her own needs. She spent her later years not knowing she was sick, being told the confusion she felt was a character flaw, watching herself disappear with no name for what was happening. She once said she always fell in love with the wrong man. What she may have meant is that she could never identify what the right man would feel like, because she had been given no reference point for that. She kept looking for something that held, something that did not require her to perform, or diminish herself, or become whatever the other person needed her to be. She never found it. The story of Rita Hayworth is the story of a woman who was extraordinary, and who was, for her entire life, treated as something to be used. Those two things do not cancel each other out. They coexist, the way they always do when someone genuinely talented is also genuinely failed by almost everyone around them. And that is why the story still demands something from the people who hear it.